start. The 9,579 meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provision agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, nuclear disarmament, and non-proliferation. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary General, distinguished ministers, and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provision Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Robert Floyd, Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, and Ms. Gorka Muhazanova, Director of the International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program, Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I warmly welcome the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, and give him the floor.
Madam President, Your Excellency, Foreign Minister Kamikawa, distinguished Council members, I thank the Government of Japan for convening the Council around the vital issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Japan knows better than any country on earth the brutal cost of nuclear carnage. But almost 8 decades after the incineration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear weapons still represent a clear and present danger to global peace and security. When I launched the disarmament agenda in 2018, I warned that, and I quote, "When each country pursues its own security without regard for others, we create global insecurity that threatens us all." Today, we meet at a time when geopolitical tensions and mistrust have escalated the risk of nuclear warfare to its highest point in decades. The doomsday clock is ticking loudly enough for all to hear. From academics and civil society groups calling for an end to the nuclear madness, to Pope Francis, who calls the possession of nuclear arms immoral, to young people across the globe worried for their future, demanding change, to the Hibakusha, the brave survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, among our greatest living examples of speaking truth to power, delivering their timeless message of peace. To Hollywood, where Oppenheimer brought the harsh reality of nuclear doomsday to vivid life for millions around the world. Madam President, humanity cannot survive a sequel of Oppenheimer. Voice after voice, alarm after alarm, survivor after survivor are calling the world back from the brink. And what is the response? States possessing nuclear weapons are absent from the table of dialogue. Investments in the tools of war are outstripping investments in the tools of peace. Arms budgets are growing while diplomacy and development budgets are shrinking. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and domains in cyber and outer space have exposed new vulnerabilities and created new risks. Countries are pouring resources into deadly new nuclear technologies and spreading the threat to new domains. And some statements have raised the prospect of unleashing nuclear hell, threats that we must all denounce with clarity and force. Nuclear weapons are the most destructive weapons ever invented, capable of eliminating all life on Earth. Today, these weapons are growing in power, range, and stealth. An accidental launch is one mistake, one miscalculation, one rash act away. And ultimately, all of humanity will pay the price. A nuclear war must never be waged because a nuclear war can never be won. Excellencies, there is one path, and one path only, that will vanquish this senseless and suicidal shadow once and for all. We need disarmament now. In fact, eliminating nuclear weapons is the first action called for under the proposed new agenda for peace, our effort to strengthen the tools of prevention and disarmament. We need nuclear weapon states to lead the way across 6 areas. First, we need dialogue. Nuclear weapon states must re-engage in working together to develop transparency and confidence-building measures to prevent any use of a nuclear weapon. This should include measures that address the nexus between nuclear weapons and new technologies and domains. Second, nuclear saber-rattling must stop. Threats to use nuclear weapons in any capacity are unacceptable. Third, nuclear weapon states must reaffirm a moratoria on nuclear testing. This means pledging to avoid taking any actions that would undermine the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, whose entry into force must be a priority. Fourth, disarmament commitments must become action. Nuclear weapon states under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons must reaffirm their commitment to that treaty and to the commitment they have made as states parties. And they should pledge to hold each other accountable to these commitments. Fifth, we need a joint first-use agreement. Nuclear weapon states must urgently agree that none of them will be the first to use nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, none should use them in any circumstances. And six, we need reduction in the number of nuclear weapons. This reduction must be led by the holders of the largest nuclear arsenals, the United States and the Russian Federation, who must find a way back to the negotiations table to fully implement the New START treaty and agree on its successor. Excellences, la responsabilité d'agir s'étend également aux États non dotés d'armes nucléaires. Je les engage vivement non seulement à honorer leurs propres obligations en matière de non-prolifération, mais aussi à contribuer aux efforts visant à rendre le désarmement nucléaire vérifiable et irréversible. Aidez-nous à tenir les États dotés d'armes nucléaires comptables de leurs actes. Aidez-nous à consolider l'architecture mondiale du désarmement, en particulier le traité sur la non-prolifération des armes nucléaires, le traité sur l'interdiction des armes nucléaires. Et apporter votre soutien aux activités de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique, ainsi à l'action que nous menons pour donner un second souffle à la conférence de désarmement. Ces dernières années, la conférence est devenue synonyme d'impasse diplomatique et de méthodes de travail dépassées. C'est honteux. Lorsque j'ai pris la parole devant les membres de la conférence le mois dernier, j'ai demandé qu'un nouveau processus intergouvernemental relevant de l'Assemblée générale soit mis en place afin de réformer les organes de désarmement, y compris la conférence. Nous espérons que cela permettrait enfin de convoquer une 4e session extraordinaire de l'Assemblée générale consacrée au désarmement. Le sommet pour l'avenir de septembre et le pacte qui en résultera offrira à la communauté internationale une coopération majeure pour se mobiliser autour des réformes concrètes de l'architecture mondiale de désarmement ainsi que les organes et institutions qui en sont les garants. Excellences, Le Conseil de sécurité a la possibilité de poser des jalons décisifs dans tous les domaines. De voir au-delà des divisions d'aujourd'hui et d'affirmer clairement qu'il est inacceptable de vivre sous la menace existentielle des armes nucléaires. De reconnaître que ce n'est qu'en travaillant main dans la main que nous pouvons éradiquer le risque d'un holocauste nucléaire et d'ouvrir la voie vers un monde débarrassé de ces instruments d'anéantissement. Il est temps et je vous remercie.
I thank the Secretary General for this briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Robert Floyd.
President, Your Excellency, Foreign Minister Kamikawa, Secretary General Guterres, distinguished Council members, it's a pleasure to engage again with the Security Council in this chamber where the world's most challenging issues are deliberated. On the 27th of September 2021, I addressed this Council under Ireland's presidency on the occasion of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty's 25th anniversary. I return today to brief the Council on CTBTO's work since then, and I'm acutely aware that today's uncertain geopolitical context is even more complex. It's one thing to debate the policy issues raised by weapons of mass destruction. But, Madam Chair, it's quite another thing to go to Japan and to visit Hiroshima, to see for yourself one of the two places on Earth where a nuclear bomb was dropped in war. I was there last August. But back on a calm summer's morning, on the 6th of August 1945, a little boy, 3 years old, is riding his tricycle. A nuclear bomb explodes 600 meters above Hiroshima, the largest, almost instantaneous obliteration of human life ever seen on Earth. Visiting the Peace Memorial Museum now, you see photos of those affected. You see things found afterwards, things you can't forget. That tiny, charred tricycle, found a kilometre away from the centre of the blast. Between 1945 and 1996, when the CTBT was opened for signature, over 2,000 nuclear tests were conducted. Most of them far bigger than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. That bomb had a blast equivalent of 15,000 tonnes of TNT. But the largest bomb ever tested. Imagine a huge pile, a huge cube of TNT, 50 million tonnes. That would be a cube 300 metres wide, 300 metres deep, and 300 metres tall, about the height of the Chrysler Building. 50 million tonnes of TNT. All that power to destroy. Before 1996, 2,000 tests. Since 1996 and the opening for signature of the CTBT, fewer than 12 tests. So what changed? The world decided enough was enough. The CTBT was agreed in 1996, a transformation for the better. But why such a success? Above all, because the treaty is fair and transparent. The treaty prescribes a global network of 337 monitoring facilities. They'll detect any significant explosion anywhere on Earth almost immediately. They monitor seismic activity, sound waves in the oceans, sound waves in the atmosphere, radioactive particles in the air. Their data streams to the CTBTO in Vienna around the clock. That data isn't secret. It's available to all CTBT state signatories, including all of the current Security Council members. And the network is growing. Since my last briefing to the Council, we've certified 4 more stations. That brings the total number of facilities to 306. 2 major national networks have been completed. Both Argentina and the Russian Federation now have established all required facilities within their territory, including stations in some of the world's most extreme environments. We're closing in on our target, but that's not all. Since I last briefed the Council, CTBTO's National Data Centres for All initiative was established, and we've had an excellent response. We're working with more and more states to set up their own national data centres so they can access all of the CTBTO data. It's obvious this fair, transparent treaty is a success that everyone can understand. That's why support for the treaty grows and grows. In 2021, I told you that 185 states had signed the treaty. Now, 187 states have signed the treaty. In 2021, I told you that 170 states had ratified the treaty. As of today, 178 have ratified it. Yes, there was one high-profile de-ratification last year, but 1 step backwards, but 9 steps forward. The trend is clear, strong. In fact, on Wednesday last week, 1 more country ratified the CTBT, proudly declaring its commitment to a world free of nuclear tests. That new ratification by Papua New Guinea is worth celebrating. I thank the government of Papua New Guinea for their valuable contribution to international peace and security. It sustains momentum towards universalization. Something else has changed since 2021. There's a sense of unease and uncertainty prompted by new wars and conflicts. Nuclear weapons are back in the public consciousness, not only thanks to the Oscar-winning Oppenheimer film. There are concerns that one state is accumulating worrying amounts of highly enriched uranium. Reports of increased activity at former nuclear test sites in a number of states. Suggestions that some states might even be considering the use of nuclear weapons. In uncertain times, the best response is a lot more certainty. Our verification system detects any nuclear explosion anywhere on Earth, anytime. However, the treaty envisages more verification tools to further boost transparency, to provide that certainty, to build trust, to dispel any suspicion or allegation about a state testing in secret, so that the world's decision makers, like yourselves, have the facts. The treaty outlines 4 verification tools. Firstly, the international monitoring system, now 90% complete. Secondly, consultation and clarification. Thirdly, confidence-building measures. And fourthly, and importantly, on-site inspection. That last one, on-site inspection, is the treaty's crucial practical tool to complement the international monitoring system. It confirms beyond any doubt that an explosion is or is not a nuclear explosion. Certainty through transparency. But until the treaty enters into force, we can't get that certainty through transparency. A lot has changed since I was last here in 2021, but one thing hasn't changed: the case for the CTBT's entry into force. What if we here today agree that the world needs more certainty and trust? so that we would never again see a nuclear weapons indiscriminate destruction? What if we all called for the CTBT to enter into force? What if there's the shared political leadership to push this over the line? That's a world with a lot more security, maybe even more peace. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Floyd for his briefing. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Goka Mozambique.
Thank you. Madam President, Secretary General Guterres, Ministers, Executive Secretary Floyd, distinguished members of the Council. It is a great honor indeed to address the UN Security Council today on one of the most important and gravest issues facing humanity. I thank the government of Japan and Foreign Minister Kamikawa for the invitation and for including a civil society representative in this meeting. It is a rare occurrence to have an NGO speaker in a meeting such as this, as nuclear weapons-related fora are traditionally inhospitable to formal non-governmental interventions. However, there is a growing recognition that inclusion of diverse stakeholders and perspectives in these discussions provides for a deeper, more holistic understanding of the nuclear weapons problem and improves our collective ability to develop better solutions. Improving gender diversity in particular is also in line with the Member States' commitments under the Women in Peace and Security resolutions. Beyond the improved numbers on women's participation, application of gender lens and feminist perspectives can help break the traditional conceptions of power and security associated with nuclear weapons and promote a more human-centered approach. I urge all Member States to actively facilitate inclusivity in multilateral fora, including the review process of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Excellencies, as Council members, you receive briefings on many issues, difficult, gruesome, heartbreaking. You hear about wars and human rights violations, terrorist acts and genocide, arms trafficking and proliferation threats. But the briefing the Council has not received and must never receive is one on the effects and consequences of a new use of nuclear weapons. A briefing that could tell of tens of thousands or more killed in the blasts, hundreds of thousands suffering and dying from radiation sickness, burns, and other injuries, millions displaced, and many, many more put at risk of starvation due to the medium and long-term effect on climate, agricultural production, and food markets around the world. This scenario seems unthinkable, and yet today, the risk of nuclear weapon use is higher than it has been in decades. As the norm against the use, the nuclear taboo, is undermined by reckless rhetoric and threats, especially those issued in the context of an active military conflict. The NPT, the foundational instrument of the non-proliferation and disarmament regime, is under tremendous pressure. Nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states are divided over the lack of implementation of nuclear disarmament commitments, while modernization, and in some cases numerical growth of arsenals, sends a message of long-term reliance on nuclear weapons. The majority of UN member states have rejected nuclear weapons by joining the NPT and nuclear weapon-free zones, and more recently by concluding the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But we are now witnessing a recommitment to nuclear weapons, an increase in the value attached to them that challenges the norm against their pursuit and acquisition and contributes to proliferation pressures. Furthermore, the divisions among the nuclear weapon states are such that the actors whose cooperation is key to achieving outcomes and advancing the goals of the NPT are effectively not talking to each other. Throughout the Cold War, the opposing superpowers were able to agree on the importance of non-proliferation and engagement on arms control and work together to secure the NPT. That is not the case today, and this is a fundamental challenge to the ability of states parties to agree on a meaningful consensus outcome at the next review conference in 2026. The nuclear weapon states often cite difficult international security environment as reason not to proceed with nuclear disarmament. The conditions are not right. Fair enough, the situation is indeed dire. However, the 5 countries defined as nuclear weapon states under the NPT are also the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, to whom the UN Charter entrusts the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It is this responsibility I want to emphasize and appeal to today, for it is in your hands, more than anyone else's, to make sure that the nuclear taboo holds and that this Council and its future iterations never have to receive the kind of briefing I described earlier. Nuclear risk has been on the mind of countless experts, policymakers, and diplomats in recent years. There has been no shortage of proposals on steps and measures to implement. However, nuclear risk reduction discussions at the NPT review process meetings get bogged down in framing debates. Is it a substitute for nuclear disarmament or its enabler? Are we talking about strategic risks or any risks emanating from nuclear weapons? Important though these questions are, the 2026 review conference cannot spend days going over the same arguments. It would not be productive, and we can only hope it will not be too late. The UN Security Council, specifically its 5 permanent members, should step up now. Recall how encouraging the Council action was in 1995, in the run-up to the indefinite extension of the NPT. Then, the Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 984 on assurances against the use of nuclear weapons. Ahead of the 11th Review Conference, the nuclear weapon states should issue pledges, individually or collectively, on reducing the nuclear risks and formalize them through a UN Security Council resolution, similarly to the Resolution 984. Most importantly, the new resolution should clearly state that nuclear weapons must never be used again under any circumstances. I further urge the nuclear weapon states to include the following commitments: no increase in nuclear arsenals, no new weapon designs, no new deployments of weapons at home or abroad, on Earth or in outer space, no nuclear testing, and no threats to use nuclear weapons. I realize this would be a tall order even in better times, not to mention today's circumstances. But precisely because of how high the stakes are, I call on you to approach it not from the place of balancing and bargaining, but from recognition of your responsibility as nuclear weapon states and permanent members of the UN Security Council. Excellencies, accepting an Oscar for his portrayal of Robert Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy said that we're all living in Oppenheimer's world now, and dedicated his award to the peacemakers everywhere. So if I may, to the UN Security Council members, and particularly the P5, I would like to say, in the world of heightened nuclear threat, be the peacemakers. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Muhamadzanova for her briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan. Excellencies, dear colleagues, I thank you all for joining me today. I also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Dr. Robert Floyd, Ms. Gorka Muhamadzanova for their insights. Distinguished colleagues, the catastrophes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must never be repeated. Based on this firm belief, Japan, as the only country to have ever suffered atomic bombings during war, has been a global leader in the quest to realize a world without nuclear weapons. As part of this endeavor, since 1994, Japan has submitted annual UN General Assembly resolutions on nuclear disarmament, which have been widely supported by the UN membership. At the last NPT review conference, Prime Minister Kishida proposed the Hiroshima Action Plan. Moreover, Japan hosted the G7 summit in Hiroshima last year. On this occasion, not only the G7 leaders, but also the Ukrainian president and representatives of ASEAN, the AU, the PIF, and the G20 deepened their understanding of the realities of the atomic bombing. Their visit to Hiroshima sent a strong message in support of a world without nuclear weapons. Distinguished colleagues, the international security environment is becoming more severe. The international community has become even more divided over how to advance nuclear disarmament. Nevertheless, we must steadily advance realistic and practical efforts toward a world without nuclear weapons. The NPT is a cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Next year, the international group of eminent persons established under Prime Minister Kishida's initiative will issue recommendations for the NPT Review Conference in 2026. This is why it is extremely relevant and meaningful to hold this briefing today at the Security Council in the midterm year of the NPT review cycle with the participation of both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to stress the following four perspectives. First, the high importance of the 5 actions set forth in the Hiroshima action plans. These are: 1 is a shared recognition on the importance of continuing the record of non-use of nuclear weapons. 2, enhancing transparency. 3, maintaining the decreasing trend of the global nuclear stockpile. 4, securing nuclear non-proliferation and promoting the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And 5, encouraging visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki by international leaders and others. We must implement these actions with an ever greater sense of urgency. Second, Japan will further strengthen and lead to efforts to embody the 5 actions of the Hiroshima Action Plan. As a new step towards that end, I am delighted to announce the establishment of the FMCT Friends. This is a cross-regional group of friends which aims to maintain and enhance political attention towards a fissile material cut-off treaty. The importance of the FMCT in limiting the quantitative improvement of nuclear weapons by banning the production of fissile materials is indisputable. Japan will further increase international and political attention toward an FMCT. Empowering young people is the key for our future. We will create a global network among the youth towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. In this context, Japan welcomes the start of the UN Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, in which future leaders visiting Hiroshima and Nagasaki will learn firsthand of the realities of atomic bombing. In addition, we need to overcome the dichotomy between deterrence and/or disarmament. Through the Japan Chair for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, Japan aims to deepen international discussion in this area. Japan promotes further cooperation with international organizations. The IAEA plays an extremely important role in promoting the international nuclear non-proliferation and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Last week, the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi, visited Japan. Japan reaffirmed its commitment to cooperate with the agency to promote peaceful use of nuclear energy, which contributes to the SDGs. Japan fully supports the first nuclear energy summit by the IAEA taking place this week. Third, the international community must be united with one voice against any movement that runs in counter to a world without nuclear weapons. A rapid buildup of nuclear capabilities by certain countries could spark a nuclear arms race. Russia's nuclear threats, let alone any use of nuclear weapons in the context of the situation in Ukraine, are absolutely unacceptable. Japan urges Russia to return to full implementation of the New START Treaty. In addition, Japan expresses strong hope for dialogues leading to the development of a broader framework of arms control that covers a wider range of weapon systems with appropriate governance. North Korea has advanced its nuclear and missile activities. It launched ballistic missile yesterday in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Such activities by North Korea threaten the peace and stability of the region and the international community. It is totally unacceptable. Moreover, there is a possibility of further provocations, including a nuclear test. In this context, the role of the 1718 Committee and its panel of experts is critically important, and its function needs to be maintained. With no clear outlook in resolving Iran's nuclear issue, restraint by countries concerned, including Iran, is necessary, particularly in light of the current heightened tension in the Middle East. Furthermore, Japan promotes the implementation of UNSC Resolution 1540 with the aim of preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to non-state actors. During the Cold War, despite the confrontational environment at that time, the international community established legal frameworks to ensure the peaceful and sustainable use of outer space, which prohibit placing nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction in outer space. Even now, Japan firmly believes that outer space must remain a domain free of nuclear weapons, and that it is our common responsibility to fully comply with the existing legal frameworks, including the Outer Space Treaty. Fourth, Japan is closely following the possible impact of emerging technologies such as AI on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. In this context, Japan welcomes the commitment to maintain human control and involvement made by the US, UK, and France during the last NPT review conference. Japan strongly calls for other nuclear weapon states to follow this commitment. I stress also the importance of the WPS perspective. We will continue to emphasize the importance of gender perspectives being taken into account in the decision-making process, as Japan has called for in its annual GA resolutions on nuclear disarmament. Distinguished colleagues, I look forward to a vibrant discussion to share ideas and proposals to accelerate concrete actions towards the next NPT review conference. I thank you. I resume my function as President of Council. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Veronica Nathaniel Macomo de Diovo, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cooperation of Mozambique.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving me the floor. I will speak in Portuguese. Senhora Presidente,
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to begin our intervention by commending Japan for the initiative of convening this important event that aims to debate a subject that is currently front and center in issues related to global peace, security, and stability. Allow me to convey to this Council the warm greetings of His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique. We express our deep gratitude to the President of this session, my sister, Her Excellency Yoko Kamikawa, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, for the honorable invitation addressed to Mozambique to participate in this ministerial event. We express our sincere recognition to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, as Secretary General of the United Nations, for the vision, leadership, and courage with which he has led our organization, particularly with regard to the international peace and security agenda. Madam President, for Mozambique, the scheduling of this topic represents an excellent opportunity for the Security Council to reflect in depth on the commitments made by the member states of the United Nations within the framework of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and other international instruments in the field of the global disarmament agenda. We are aware that we are going through a challenging international situation due to the occurrence of complex situations with a direct impact on the architecture of international peace and security. Indeed, in various parts of the world, political and military instability, armed conflict, poverty, and the effects of climate change, which continue to have a significant and negative impact, challenge efforts to promote peace and development. The situation is exacerbated by the fragmentation and recomposition of non-state groups with access to the new information and communication technologies that use them for terrorist purposes. Therefore, Mozambique is particularly concerned about the dangerous tendency to construct and disseminate narratives and other acts that generate mistrust, which could lead us to setbacks in our agenda of disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. It is our understanding that the elements of a concrete and practical agenda through which to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict and arms races and strengthen the nuclear non-proliferation treaty include the recognition by all member states that the nuclear status quo that generates instability, distrust, uncertainty, and competition derives from the incoherence between discourse and practice. We say one thing and we do another. In this context, Mozambique is committed to the effective implementation of the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty, also known as the Treaty of Canindaba. These instruments denote a strong show of support for multilateral approaches to nuclear disarmament and are essential to promoting global security, reducing the proliferation of nuclear weapons and maintaining a safer and more peaceful world.
Este compromisso global é
This
crucial
global
para a paz
commitment
e
is
segurança
crucial for
internacionais.
international peace and security.
A comunidade internacional
The
deve
international
continuar a trabalhar em
community
conjunto
must
para
continue
alcançar mundo mais
to work
seguro e
together
livre
to
de armas nucleares.
achieve a world which is safer and
Moçambique
free from nuclear
defende que a
weapons.
adoção de uma abordagem
Mozambique
assertiva e
holds the
coerente
view
entre as
that the
intenções
adoption of an
declaradas
assertive
e
and
ações
coherent
concretas de cada
approach
dos nossos
between the
países
declared
deve ser
intentions and
alicerçada
concrete
na
actions
certeza de que
of each of
uma
our
guerra com
countries must be
recurso
based
ao
on the
armamento nuclear
certainty that a
teria
war
consequências
using
catastróficas
nuclear
para toda a
weapons
humanidade.
would have catastrophic
Devemos reconhecer
consequences
que,
for all
se tal
humanity.
acontecesse,
We
seria
must
extremamente
recognize
injusto
that
em relação a todos os
if this
países e
happens,
povos de
it
todo o
would
mundo
be
que amam a
extremely unfair
paz
to
e
all
abominam
countries
as armas
and peoples
nucleares.
around the world who love peace
Seria
and deplore nuclear
particularmente
weapons.
injusto para
It
a
would
África,
particularly
na
be
medida em
unfair
que
to
nenhum dos
Africa,
54 países
taking into
africanos
account that
é
none of the
detentor
54
de armas
African
nucleares.
countries possess nuclear
Moçambique,
weapons.
como país que
Mozambique,
acredita e valoriza as
as a
instituições
country that
internacionais,
believes and values
defende
international
mundo
institutions, is
que não
in favor of
gravite
a
em
world
torno da
that
doutrina
does
de
not
dissuasão
gravitate
nuclear.
around the doctrine of
Somos a
nuclear
favor de
deterrence.
mundo
We
que
are
dê
in favor
primazia à
of a world
prioridade
that
de
gives
desenvolvimento
primacy
de
and
tecnologia
priority to
nuclear
the
para fins
development
pacíficos.
of nuclear technology for
Queremos,
peaceful
por isso,
purposes.
servirmos desta sessão do
therefore
Conselho
want
de
to
Ministros para
avail
recomendarmos
ourselves of this session
a
of the Security
11ª
Council to
Conferência
recommend
de Revisão do
that
Tratado de
the
Não
11th
Proliferação Nuclear,
Review Conference of
prevista para
the
o ano 2026,
Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty
considera
scheduled for
adotar esta
2026
abordagem nos
should
seus pontos de
consider
vista de
adopting
trabalho,
this approach
à luz da
in its
responsabilidade
agenda
política
items
dos líderes
in light
atuais
of the
de construir
political
mundo
responsibility
livre
of
de armas
current
nucleares
leaders
para
to
as
build a
gerações
world
vindouras.
free of nuclear weapons
Os
for
nossos
future
filhos e as
generations.
gerações vindouras
Our
merecem viver num
children
mundo de
and the
paz,
future generations
harmonia
deserve to
e
live in a world
concórdia.
of peace, harmony and
Neste
concord.
contexto, gostaríamos
Madam
de
President, in this
avançar
context,
com 3 aspectos que
we
consideramos
would like to
importantes como
address
nossa
3 aspects
contribuição.
that we consider important as our
Presidente.
contribution.
Moçambique reitera, melhor dizendo, primeiro, a adoção de
First,
uma abordagem
the
equilibrada
adoption
no
of
uso
a
da
balanced
tecnologia
approach
nuclear,
to the use of nuclear
incluindo a inteligência
technology,
artificial que se pode traduzir na
including
implementação da
artificial
legislação internacional
intelligence, which can
pertinente
translate
e na concertação
into the
entre os Estados.
implementation of relevant international
Segundo,
legislation
a
and
priorização de
consultation between
investimentos
states.
em programas
Second,
nucleares com
the
fins pacíficos,
prioritization of
dando
investments
ênfase
in
à
nuclear
transição
programs for
energética
peaceful
e na
purposes,
medicina
with
humana.
emphasis on energy transition
Sugerimos
and
em
human
particular
medicine.
a criação
We
de pacto
suggest in
global,
particular the
sob a forma de uma
creation of a
incubadora,
global
através da
compact
qual
in the form
sejam
of an
partilhados o
incubator through
conhecimento de
which
tecnologias
nuclear
nucleares
knowledge
relevantes
and
para o progresso da humanidade
relevant
em
technology to
consonância
the
com os objetivos
progress
de
of humanity are shared
desenvolvimento
in line with the
sustentável.
sustainable development goals.
Terceiro,
A
o
third,
reconhecimento da
the
valorização do trabalho
recognition
da
and
Comissão de Armamento das
appreciation
Nações
of the
Unidas,
work of the United
do
Nations
Comitê
Disarmament Commission,
1540 e da Agência
the
Internacional de
1540
Energia Atômica
Committee of
pelos esforços em prol do
2040 and
desarmamento
the
nuclear
International
e
Atomic
não
Energy
proliferação de armas nucleares
Agency for the
e
efforts
que
towards
possa exercer
nuclear
o seu
disarmament and
mandato com
non-proliferation,
isenção
and
e
may they exercise
imparcialidade.
the mandate with
O apoio a ações de
impartiality.
formação e assistência técnica pode contribuir para a capacitação
Support for
institucional
training and technical
dos
assistance can
países
contribute
mais
to the
vulneráveis a
institutional
conflitos.
capacity building of countries most
Senhora
vulnerable
Presidente,
to conflicts.
Moçambique
Madam
reitera o
President,
seu compromisso de
Mozambique
continuar a
reiterates
colaborar
its
com os
commitment
organismos
to continue
internacionais para a
collaborating with
promoção do
international
armamento nuclear,
organizations to promote
do
nuclear
uso pacífico
disarmament
de energia nuclear
with
para uma
the
paz
peaceful use
sustentável em
of
prol do
nuclear energy for
desenvolvimento
sustainable
econômico
peace
e
in favor
social
of economic
dos
and
nossos
social
países.
development.
Excelência,
Excellencies,
sendo março o mês dedicado à
with
mulher,
March being a
gostaríamos
month
de recordar
dedicated
que
to
em
women,
março de
we would like
2023,
to remind
durante
you
a presidência
that in
moçambicana
March
no Conselho de Segurança,
2023, during
enaltecemos
Mozambique's
de forma
presidency of the
efusiva o
Council,
papel da mulher
we
na
effusively
construção e
praised the
consolidação
role
da
of
paz,
women in building and
incluindo na
consolidating
prevenção
peace,
e resolução de conflitos.
including in conflict prevention and resolution.
Acreditamos que
We
a agenda de
believe
desarmamento
that
e não proliferação
the
nuclear
nuclear
podem
disarmament
também
and
ser
non-proliferation
efetivas se
agenda
continuarmos a
can also
contar
be
com o
effective if we
envolvimento
continue
ativo da
to
mulher,
count on the
assumindo
active
igualmente o
involvement of
papel de
women,
liderança nesta matéria.
also assuming a leadership role in
Uma
this matter.
maior e melhor inclusão da mulher nas questões
Greater
prementes
and
e
better
desafiadoras
inclusion of
da
women
atualidade,
in
como
today's
é o caso
pressing
de armamento e de não
challenges,
proliferação de armas
issues such
nucleares,
as disarmament
pode
and
contribuir para a
non-proliferation of nuclear
construção e
weapons
manutenção da paz,
can
bem
contribute
como
to the building of
desenvolvimento
maintenance of
internacional.
peace as well as international
É
development.
fundamental reconhecer e valorizar o papel da
Essential
mulher
to
na
recognize
busca de
and value the
mundo
role
mais
of women in the
seguro
search
e
for a
pacífico.
safer and more
A
peaceful peaceful world.
Gostaria de
In
manifestar
conclusion,
a nossa
I
firme
would like to
convicção
express our
de que juntos,
firm conviction
fazendo
that
cada um a sua
together
parte,
each one of us doing their part, we can create a world where humanity can live in peace, security, and harmony. Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor, and I thank everyone else for your attention. Thank you very much.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. De Novo for her statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, Permanent Representative of the United States and member of President Biden's cabinet.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by welcoming you here to the Council today and thank Japan for convening this important meeting. Thank you, Secretary General, for your statement, and I'd like to thank the two briefers for their briefings and as well for your recommendations. Around 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy visited American University in Washington, D.C. He was on campus to deliver a commencement address titled A Strategy of Peace. And in it, he outlined not only a plan to curb nuclear arms, but a hopeful path to world peace, despite escalating nuclear armament. Ultimately, he explained, our most common basic link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we're all mortal. Today, 6 decades after Kennedy's landmark address, and 5.5 since the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons entered into force, these links remain, as does the United States' commitment to strengthening and upholding the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime with the NPT at its center. And yet, the global framework that has curbed nuclear armament for years is under increasing strain. Iran has continued expanding segments of its nuclear program without any credible civilian justification, and for over 5 years has failed to cooperate with the IAEA. Since launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has irresponsibly invoked dangerous nuclear rhetoric and walked away from several of its arms control obligations. All the while, China has rapidly and opaquely built up and diversified its nuclear weapons stores, and Russia and China have remained unwilling to engage in substantive discussions around arms control or risk reduction. What's more, both countries have defended and even enabled dangerous proliferators. That brings me to the DPRK, which continues its unlawful development of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. Just this weekend, you've heard, in fact, we saw multiple DPRK ballistic missile launches testing delivery systems for nuclear weapons. We urge everyone in this council to support the 1718 Committee's panel of experts by extending its mandate later this week. Silencing independent and objective experts will not change the reality of the DPRK's efforts. It will only make it more difficult for us to address this threat. Colleagues, it is not just these individual actors putting a strain on the global non-proliferation regime. Today, our existing regime faces new and evolving challenges, like artificial intelligence, which can be hacked or malfunction, be misinterpreted, or provide misinformation. My hope is that today we can take stock of the challenges posed by these new technologies and, more importantly, commit to addressing them. In order to do that, it is critical that every member of this council reaffirm their commitment to an objective I believe we all want to see: a world without nuclear weapons, with undiminished security for all. So how do we get there? At a basic level, we must comply with existing nuclear arms control obligations and engage constructively on potential new ones. The United States is willing to engage in bilateral arms control discussions with Russia and China right now without preconditions. All they have to do is say yes and come to the table in good faith. States with nuclear weapons must also maintain a moratorium on explosive nuclear testing and support the monitoring capabilities outlined by Dr. Floyd today. In addition to forestall a potential arms race, we need to see an end to the production of fissile material for use in nuclear weapons and continue pursuing negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty. Today, we announced that we are officially among Japan's Friends of the FMCT Coalition, a group dedicated to seeing this treaty adopted. Colleagues, there's more we must do to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons states must provide transparency into their programs and engage with one another to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict. The United States has modeled this transparency and cooperation and will continue to press for both. We must empower all those with the potential to leverage technology for good and minimize its harmful effects, including women who are frequently left out of the conversation around non-proliferation. We must hold would-be proliferators to account and fully implement relevant Security Council resolutions, including by supporting subsidiary bodies like the 1718 and 5040 committees, the latter of which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. We must identify and implement measures around new technologies like those outlined in the U.S. proposed political declaration on the responsible military use of AI and autonomy, which already has over 50 co-sponsors. And then there's the issue of outer space and the treaty governing it. Let me be clear. Any placement of nuclear weapons into orbit around the Earth would be unprecedented, dangerous, and unacceptable. States parties must commit to upholding our obligations under Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, and we must urge all member states who are not yet party to it to accede to it without delay. And today I can announce that together with Japan, the United States put forward a Security Council resolution reaffirming the fundamental obligations that parties have under this treaty, and further calling on member states to not develop any nuclear weapons or other kinds of weapons of mass destruction that are specifically designed to be placed in orbit around Earth. We look forward to engaging with this Council to forge consensus around this text. And outside of the Council, we're interested in engaging with state parties to the Outer Space Treaty to explore ways to increase confidence in compliance with Article 4. The United States has already begun considering approaches to help ensure that countries cannot deploy nuclear weapons in orbit undetected, and we intend to engage with other state parties as our ideas evolve. Colleagues, 60 years ago, the world faced a choice: escalation toward nuclear war or cooperation and non-proliferation. Today, as we face that same choice, we must not allow our differences to prevent us from taking action on this critical matter of international security. In the words of President Kennedy, confident and unafraid we labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but toward a strategy of peace. The United States will continue to lead by example, in good faith, and with all Council members and member states in that pursuit. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Thomas Greenfield for her statement. I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Frances Piaggi Argali, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, I thank you for convening this high-level briefing on the critical issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Let me also thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Mr. Robert Floyd, and Ms. Gorka Mokatsanova for their valuable and informative briefings. Sierra Leone commends Japan for its leadership in convening this important meeting and look forward to engaging in constructive discussions aimed at enhancing international peace and security in a nuclear-free world. Madam President, at the outset, Sierra Leone recalls that in January 1947, the Council accepted as one of its most urgent tasks the global elimination of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction in line with General Assembly Resolution 41-1, underlining that the general reduction of armaments and armed forces was an important measure to strengthen and maintain international peace and security. Regrettably, events overtook the early Security Council WMD initiatives, ending the Council's substantive work on the regulation of armaments based on Article 26. Sierra Leone commends the General Assembly, as envisaged in the UN Charter, for stepping in and being instrumental over the years in the adoption of treaties regulating WMD, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017. Sierra Leone reiterates that the NPT is the cornerstone of the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture and a key instrument in the efforts to halt vertical and horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons, an essential foundation for the pursuit of nuclear disarmament. It has been a historic success, and Sierra Leone is encouraged by the progress made on Pillars 2 and 3 of the treaty. However, we are concerned that the nuclear disarmament pillar has made very slow and disappointing overall progress. Sierra Leone reiterates that nuclear disarmament continues to be of the highest priority, and the total elimination of nuclear weapons is the only guarantee against the use or threat of use. Therefore, we reiterate our call for a balanced implementation of the 3 pillars of the NPT. While we commend the Council, including many countries and organizations, for their tireless efforts in taking initiatives to tackle non-proliferation and WMDs over the years, Sierra Leone deplores that since 2010, the level of Council engagement on disarmament has fallen, and debates on general disarmament and its role in the maintenance of international peace and security are few and far between. This high-level briefing on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation presents a timely and significant opportunity for the international community to reaffirm its commitment to advancing the goals of disarmament and non-proliferation. Madam President, the recent developments in the global nuclear landscape underscore the urgent need for collective action to address the escalating risks associated with nuclear weapons. The picture of the growing nuclear risks is grim and gravely concerning. In this regard, we know that there is extensive modernization of nuclear arsenals, as reported in 2023, increasing military expenditure, halt of the strategic stability dialogue between the 2 major nuclear weapon states, withdrawal from the 2010 New START Treaty, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement, capping strategic nuclear forces of the 2 major nuclear weapon states, and the negotiations for a successor to the New START Treaty being put on hold. There is no gainsaying that a nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought. However, the possession of nearly all of the world's more than 12,000 nuclear weapons by a minute number of member states, along with the recent rhetoric threatening to use them, remains a significant concern. Despite a long-standing legal obligation to eliminate nuclear weapons, certain member states continue to invest heavily in their nuclear arsenal without advancing any meaningful solutions for disarmament. We also note with alarm the escalation of missile capabilities, increased plutonium production, along with uranium enrichment activities of certain states. Furthermore, we note the failure of 2 consecutive NPT review conferences, setbacks faced by preparatory committee for the 2026 NPT review conference in the first session, and the failure of the Conference on Disarmament to agree on a program of work, preventing it from initiating substantive deliberations. In the light of growing tensions among nuclear-armed states and the heightened threat perceptions resulting from recent geopolitical developments, it is imperative that the Security Council takes decisive steps to address these challenges and mitigate the risks of nuclear conflict. Madam President, while some nuclear weapon states would argue that with the current prevailing circumstances, the security environment is not conducive for nuclear disarmament or the total elimination of nuclear weapons, Sierra Leone, as a non-nuclear weapon state, advanced that it is for the very same reason of global security tensions, threat of use, and the possibility of miscalculations that nuclear disarmament must remain the highest priority and must begin now. The continued possession of nuclear weapons and the endorsement of nuclear deterrence perpetuate instability and insecurity for all nations. Instead of preventing their usage, nuclear deterrence policies have enabled conflict and heightened the risk of nuclear weapons use. The specter of nuclear catastrophe looms over major conflicts in the region, such as Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Korean Peninsula. The only effective way to prevent the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is through their total elimination. This necessitates rejecting the dangerous theories of nuclear deterrence. Sierra Leone calls on all nuclear weapon states to engage bilaterally and multilaterally to make nuclear disarmament a reality and to unequivocally commit to transparent, complete, verifiable, irreversible, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament. In this context, Sierra Leone welcomes the entry into force of the landmark treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons on 22nd January 2022. Sierra Leone is encouraged by the steady progress of the TPNW. To date, 93 states have signed the TPNW, including Sierra Leone, and 70 have ratified or acceded to it. The meetings of state parties to the TPNW, including the most recent one in November 2023, have advanced an ambitious action plan towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. My delegation believes that the TPNW serves as a complementary instrument to the NPT and will end the long impasse in multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations. Sierra Leone therefore calls on all states to support and join the TPNW as a matter of urgency to advance the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Additionally, Sierra Leone expresses concern over NWS that have not signed or ratified the CTBT 28 years since establishment, thus hampering its entry into force. We urge member states who have revoked their ratification to rejoin the CTBT. Sierra Leone welcomes the adoption of Resolution 2310 in 2016 and urges all states that have not either signed nor ratified the CTBT to do so without further delay. Sierra Leone recommends that the Security Council considers issuing a presidential statement or resolution that outlines concrete confidence-building measures to reduce the threat of nuclear war and delineate strategies for advancing nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Such a council product could serve as a catalyst for renewed international efforts to promote disarmament and enhance global security. Furthermore, Sierra Leone recommends the Security Council task the Secretary General with preparing a comprehensive report that offers actionable recommendations on how the Council, the General Assembly, and other relevant UN bodies can collaborate more effectively to address the complex challenges of nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Enhanced cooperation and coordination within the UN system is essential for advancing the shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Sierra Leone also underscores the importance of promoting the equal, full, and effective participation of women in all decision-making processes related to the disarmament as recommended by the Secretary General in his report, Securing Our Common Future, an Agenda for Disarmament. Women play a crucial role in advancing peace and security, and their inclusion in disarmament efforts is essential for achieving sustainable progress in this critical area. In conclusion, Madam President, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the principles of disarmament, non-proliferation, and international peace and security. We recognize the paramount importance of concerted global efforts to address the challenges posed by nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, and stand ready to engage constructively with all member states to advance our collective efforts towards a safer and more secure world for present and future generations. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Adgali for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President, for arranging this important meeting. I would also like to express my gratitude to Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Executive Secretary Dr. Floyd, and Director Bukachanova for their briefings. Throughout the human history, the evolution of foundational technology has had only one direction. It spreads far and wide. From wheels to the printing press, combustion engines, and electricity, such technology became cheaper and more available. Such proliferations of technology applied to weapons as well. Whether it was bows and arrows or gunpowder, weapons technologies in time disseminated all over the world and then were used. However, one technology bucks the trend. That is nuclear weapons. Witnessing their deadly and devastating impacts in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the international community has managed to contain the use and proliferation of nuclear weapons. Such a colossal feat is not an accidental achievement, but the result of extraordinary and commendable multilateral efforts by the international community. Pledges from both nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation have spared us from nuclear apocalypse. The culmination of these efforts is a treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. While the NPT serves as the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime, other key norms and initiatives, such as the CTBT and FMCT, are also crucial for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Madam President, regrettably, however, the current state of affairs indicates that this hard-fought and hard-won architecture is now being challenged more than ever before. First, the threat of the use of nuclear weapons has become an unprecedented concern to the international community. We hear precarious and irresponsible nuclear rhetoric amid Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. Russia's tactical nuclear weapons are now deployed in Belarus, and its CTBT ratification was withdrawn. The New START is suspended. And in another part of the world, rapid and opaque nuclear buildup under the guise of modernization is being reported, while genuine dialogue for disarmament is turned away. All of these developments have decreased the level of confidence on the nuclear weapon states' commitment to disarmament. Second, the prospect of non-proliferation is no less bleak. Indeed, the DPRK, the world's preeminent proliferator, continues to blatantly violate multiple Security Council resolutions and develop its nuclear and missile programs. While we are discussing non-proliferation at this chamber, the DPRK continues its provocations, including yesterday's launches of multiple ballistic missiles, supposedly targeting densely populated areas and key military installations of my country. The DPRK vows to launch 3 more military reconnaissance satellites this year using ballistic missile technology, and provides ballistic missiles to Russia in violation of the Security Council resolutions. Pyongyang now has markedly low threshold for using nuclear weapons. Its aggressive nuclear policy even allows for preemptive strikes against the Republic of Korea, which Kim Jong-un declared as a principal foreign enemy state. And we should be concerned about the IAEA's conclusion that it has lost continuity of knowledge on parts of Iran's ongoing nuclear activities. Third, rapid advancement of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence may add to the existing challenges to the global non-proliferation regime. As the ultimate enabler, AI has the potential to transform all aspects of military affairs. If the governance to ensure responsible use of AI lags behind, the world will be left with more vulnerability, including the potential risk of accidental or unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. Furthermore, new domains such as outer space and cyberspace have introduced new complexities. Placement of nuclear weapons in outer space or illicit activities in cyberspace to gain technology or finance WMDs can undermine the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. Madam President, against this backdrop, the Security Council should stand at the very forefront of addressing these complex yet monumental challenges. First, the Security Council should enforce vital global norms. Through its resolutions and sanctions regimes, the Council must respond to violations of non-proliferation obligations. It should ensure that all sanctions resolutions, which are legally binding on all UN member states, are fully implemented. As a legal maxim goes, impunity always leads to greater violations. The Security Council should also make the best use of its own tools to ensure full implementation of Security Council resolutions, including the subsidiary organs such as 1718 Sanctions Committee and the panel of experts on DPRK. Just as the Security Council took initiative to respond to the threat from linkage between non-state actors and WMDs with Resolution 1540, 20 years ago, the Security Council should take more interest in leading a dialogue and deliberations on the new trends and the crucial new topics of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, in particular concerning AI, cyberspace, and outer space. The Republic of Korea will strive to bring in fresh air in this regard. Third, in doing all these, the Security Council should lead by example. This Council is entrusted with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. And if we are to be able to act on behalf of all member states to carry out our duties, there should be no place for inaction or self-contradictory measures. In this regard, a permanent member and a depository of the NPT should bear a special sense of responsibility, not to shake, but to uphold the decades-old international architecture. Especially its military cooperation with DPRK against Security Council's own decisions would result in the erosion of the very authority and relevance of the Security Council. Madam President and dear colleagues, the film Oppenheimer gives us a lot to reflect on. The quote that they won't fear it until they understand it, and they won't understand it until they used it, is indeed chilling and prescient. Nuclear weapons were used, and we understand and fear them. Let us take further determined steps to maintain and strengthen the NPT regime in the name of the UN Security Council. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its commitment to this noble endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Su Excelencia Kamikawa
Your
Yoko,
Excellency
Ministra de
Kamikawa Yoko,
Relaciones
Minister of Foreign
Exteriores de
Affairs of
Japón
Japan
y Presidenta
and
del Consejo
President
de
of the
Seguridad.
Security Council,
Permítame
may I begin
felicitarla por
by
la
congratulating
impecable
you on
conducción
your
del Consejo
impeccable
durante el mes de
stewardship
marzo.
of the Council during the month of March.
Agradezco la convocatoria
I'd
a este
also like
debate
to
de
thank you
alta
for
relevancia
convening
para la
this
Organización de las
debate
Naciones
of
Unidas.
high relevance for the United Nations
Destaco la
Organization.
intervención del
I'd
Secretario
like to
General
highlight
Antonio
the statement
Guterres
of the Secretary
y,
General
una
Antonio
vez
Guterres,
más,
and once again
reconozco sus acciones
acknowledge
en favor
his
del
action
desarme,
in
la no
favor of
proliferación
disarmament,
y la paz
non-proliferation,
mundial.
and world peace.
También
I
agradezco
would
las
also like to
exposiciones
express my
de los
gratitude for
ponentes,
the
el señor Robert
briefings
Floyd
of our
y de la
briefers, Mr.
señora
Robert
Gaukar
Floyd and Madam
Mujassanova.
Gaukar Katsanova.
El desarme nuclear y la no
Nuclear
proliferación
disarmament and
son una
non-proliferation
responsabilidad
are
moral
a
y ética
moral and ethical
que la comunidad
responsibility.
internacional debe abordar
The
con
international
determinación
community should
y acción
address it with
concentrada.
determination and concerted
Este es un
action.
momento crítico
This is a
de la
critical
historia,
moment in history
donde la estabilidad global,
where global
la seguridad y la
security,
existencia de las generaciones futuras
stability,
penden de
and
un
the
hilo,
existence of future
pues es un hecho
generations
que,
are hanging
aún
by
desde
a
su
thread.
creación, las armas nucleares han
It's a
sumido a
fact,
la humanidad
indeed,
bajo la
that since their
sombra de una
creation,
posible
nuclear
devastación.
weapons have
Su uso acarrearía
placed
consecuencias
humanity in the
catastróficas y
shadows of a
efectos
possible
irreversibles
devastation. The
para el medio ambiente,
use of
la
nuclear
economía
weapons
mundial
would have
y
disastrous
la vida misma
consequences and
de nuestro
irreversible
planeta.
fallout for the environment,
Señora
the world
Presidenta,
economy, and the very life of
es
our planet.
imperativo que todos los
Madam
estados,
President, it is imperative that all
especialmente
states,
aquellos con
especially
arsenales
those
nucleares,
with nuclear
se
arsenals,
comprometan a reducir y
commit
eliminar su
to
existencia
reducing and eliminating
y adopten
their
medidas
arsenals,
tangibles en
and
esa
they
dirección
adopt
para
measures
evitar su
that are
uso
tangible
accidental o
to
deliberado,
prevent the
así
accidental
como
or
para
deliberate
fomentar un
use of
clima
these
de
weapons
confianza y
and
cooperación entre
to
las
foster a
naciones.
climate of trust and cooperation
El
amongst
Ecuador
nations.
reafirma que el Tratado de no
Ecuador
proliferación
reaffirms that the
nuclear constituye
non-proliferation
la
treaty
piedra angular de la
is the
arquitectura del desarme
cornerstone of
y la no
nuclear
proliferación nuclear, y que las partes
disarmament and
contratantes
non-proliferation.
deben cumplir sus
Further,
obligaciones
contracting
internacionales
parties
asumidas en
should
virtud
abide
de
by their
este.
international
La
obligations
próxima
under this
conferencia de
treaty.
examen del
The
TNP
next NPT
es una
review
oportunidad
conference
invaluable
is an
para
invaluable
lograr
opportunity
avances y
to
compromisos.
bring about
Hago un llamado a
progress and
suscribir y
commitments.
ratificar el tratado sobre la
I
prohibición
hereby
de las armas
issue a
nucleares,
call for all
instrumento complementario al
states to
TNP.
sign the
La funcionalidad
treaty on
conjunta de
banning
estos
nuclear weapons, which is a
instrumentos es
complementary
necesaria
instrument to the
para la
NPT.
proscripción de las armas
The
nucleares
joint
y
functionality
otorga
of these two
acciones
instruments
prácticas
is
y
necessary
concretas
for
para
the
ese
complete
objetivo.
ban of nuclear weapons and
Reafirmo la
grants practical
importancia
action
del
and
Tratado
specific
de
action
Prohibición
towards that
Completa de
goal.
Ensayos
I
Nucleares
reaffirm
y
here the
resalto la
importance of the
necesidad de su
Comprehensive
pronta
Test Ban
entrada en vigor.
Treaty and highlight the
Mi
need
país
for it to
continuará
enter into
promoviendo el
force soon.
afianzamiento de las
My
zonas
country will
libres de
continue
armas
to
nucleares
promote
y al hacerlo
consolidation of
recuerda la
nuclear
importancia
free
del Tratado de
zones, and in
Tlatelolco,
so doing
que
recalls
permitió que
here the
América Latina
Tlatelolco
y el
Treaty,
Caribe
which allowed Latin
se
America and the
convirtiera en la
Caribbean
primera
to
zona
become the
libre de armas
first
nucleares en una
zone
región
free of
densamente
nuclear
poblada.
weapons in a
Señora
highly
Presidenta,
populated and densely populated
los
zone of the
mecanismos de
planet.
control y
Madam
verificación deben
President,
ser
the mechanisms
fortalecidos
for
para prevenir
monitoring
la
and
propagación
verification
de
should
armas
be
nucleares
strengthened
a
to
actores
prevent
estatales
the spread of
o
nuclear
no
weapons
estatales.
to state or
La
non-state
adopción
actors.
unánime de la
The
resolución
unanimous
1540
adoption
en
of
abril del
Resolution
2004,
1540 in
es
April of
decir, hace
2004,
casi 20
in other
años
words,
ya,
almost 20 years
fue
ago
una
now,
medida importante y
was
oportuna en
a
los
key
esfuerzos del
and
Consejo de
timely
Seguridad
measure in the efforts
encaminados a
undertaken by the
prevenir la
Security Council
proliferación de armas de
to
destrucción
prevent
masiva,
proliferation
sus
of weapons of
sistemas
mass
vectores,
destruction, their
así
vector
como los
systems,
materiales
and
conexos a agentes no
related
estatales.
materials to
En
agents
tal
that are
sentido,
not state agents.
la
In
resolución
that regard,
1540
Resolution
se ha
1540
convertido
has
en un
become
componente
a
vital de la
vital
arquitectura
element
global de la
of
no
the
proliferación.
global non-proliferation
El
architecture.
Consejo tiene la
The Council
responsabilidad de
has a
liderar los esfuerzos
responsibility
globales
to lead
para el
global
desarme
efforts
nuclear
for
y la no
nuclear
proliferación.
disarmament and
La
non-proliferation.
existencia de una
The
sola arma
existence
nuclear
of a
adicional
single additional
aumenta el
nuclear
riesgo de una
weapon
catástrofe
increases
global,
the risk of global
por lo que el
disaster.
Consejo debe estar
Therefore, the
unido
Council
en el
should stand
compromiso de
united
impedir que
in
ello
its
ocurra.
commitment to preventing
Esto
such
implica
an
la
occurrence.
adopción de
That
resoluciones
involves the
firmes,
adoption of firm
el respeto a las
resolutions,
decisiones ya
respect
tomadas,
of decisions
el
already taken,
fomento al diálogo
and
entre las partes
fostering dialogue
interesadas
between
y la
interested
promoción de la
parties and the
cooperación
promotion of
internacional
international
en
cooperation
materia de
in
desarme
the
y no
area
proliferación,
of disarmament and
especialmente en los
non-proliferation,
temas de que este
especially in
Consejo
those
mantiene
topics
relación con la
on this
República
Council's
Popular
agenda
Democrática de
relating
Corea
to the
y la
DPRK
cuestión nuclear
and the
de la
nuclear
República
issue
Islámica
of
de Irán.
the Islamic Republic of
Señora
Iran.
Presidenta,
Madam President,
mi delegación
my
reconoce la
delegation
valiosa contribución de las
acknowledges the
mujeres
valuable
en la
contribution of
toma de
women in taking
decisiones y
decisions
la práctica
and
del
in the
desarme y
practice
la no
of
proliferación.
disarmament and non-proliferation.
Este Consejo
This
debe
Council
seguir
should
trabajando
continue
para que las
working
mujeres
so that
tengan una
women
participación plena,
can participate fully
significativa
in
y
a
eficaz
significant and
en los
effective
procesos de
manner
desarme
in
nuclear y no
nuclear
proliferación.
disarmament and non-proliferation
Es
processes.
importante
It's
reconocer que el
important to
desarme nuclear y la
recognize
no
that nuclear
proliferación
disarmament and
requieren un
non-proliferation
compromiso a largo plazo,
require a long-term commitment,
perseverancia y voluntad
require
política
perseverance and
por
political
parte de todos los
determination
Estados
by
miembros.
all member
El
states.
futuro de la humanidad
The future of
depende de la
humanity
capacidad para
depends
superar
on our
nuestras
ability to
diferencias y
overcome our
trabajar
differences and to work
juntos
together
en la
towards a
consecución de un
world
mundo libre de armas
free of nuclear
nucleares,
weapons.
pues como el Ecuador
And
no se
as
cansará
Ecuador
de
never
repetir,
will tire
no
of
existen
repeating,
buenas manos
there
para
are
las
no
armas
good
nucleares.
hands
Muchas
for
gracias.
entrusting nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam
je tiens tout d'abord à vous
I would like to
remercier
first and
pour
foremost
avoir
thank you
organisé
for
cette
organizing
réunion.
this
Et
meeting.
je remercie le
And
secrétaire
I'd like to
général
thank
et
the
les
Secretary
autres
General and the
intervenants
other
pour leurs
speakers
exposés.
for their briefings.
Nous nous réunissons
We
dans
come
un
together
contexte de
in a context
fragilisation
which is
sans précédent des instruments de maîtrise
unprecedentedly
des armements et de
weakening instruments
non-prolifération.
for
La
non-proliferation
rhétorique irresponsable
and
de la
mastering
Russie
weapons.
dans le
The
contexte de
irresponsible
sa guerre
nuclear
d'agression
rhetoric of
contre
Russia in the
l'Ukraine
context of its
rappelle
war of aggression
l'impératif de
against Ukraine
prévenir la guerre
reminds us
nucléaire
of
et
the
la course aux
imperative
armements.
of preventing nuclear
La France
weapons
rappelle
and the
son
arms race.
attachement à
France
la
reiterates its
déclaration du
attachment
P5 du
to the
3 janvier
P5
2022
statement of
qui
January
affirme qu'une telle
2022,
guerre ne peut
which
être
affirms
gagnée
that such
et
a
ne
war
doit
can never
jamais
be
être
won and
menée.
should never be
Nous appelons tous
undertaken.
les États
We
dotés à
would
s'y
call
conformer.
upon all
La France est
weapon states
résolue
to
à travailler
adhere to
en
it.
vue de l'objectif
France
ultime
stands
d'un monde
determined
sans armes
to work
nucléaires,
towards a
avec une
world free of
sécurité non
nuclear
diminuée
weapons
pour tous.
with
Le
undiminished
traité de
security for all.
non-prolifération demeure
The
l'instrument
non-proliferation treaty
incontournable à cette
remains
fin.
the unavoidable
En
instrument
premier lieu,
to
le
that end.
désarmement nucléaire ne
First,
peut être
nuclear
réalisé qu'à
disarmament
travers une
can only
approche
be achieved
progressive en compte
based
au
on
contexte
concrete
stratégique.
action and
Il est
measures which
primordial de
take into
poursuivre
account
les
the
efforts
strategic
nécessaires à la
context. It's
réduction
vital to
des
continue
plus
efforts
gros
necessary
stocks
to
d'arsenaux
reduce
nucléaires mondiaux.
huge
La France
stockpiles
a
of
contribué
nuclear
à ces efforts
arsenals around the
en
world.
réduisant son
France
propre
contributes to these
arsenal
efforts by
à un
reducing
niveau
its
de
own
stricte
arsenals
suffisance pour
to
sa
the level of
sécurité.
strict
Nous
sufficiency for its
encourageons
own
l'ensemble des
security.
États
We would
dotés à
encourage
adopter
all
des
weapon
mesures
states
efficaces de transparence
to
sur leurs forces nucléaires et
adopt
la taille de
effective
leurs arsenaux.
measures of
La France
transparency
déplore la suspension
in
par
order
la
to
Russie de sa participation au traité New START et l'exhorte
strengthen
à
this.
revenir
France
sur cette
deplores the
décision.
suspension in this regard by
La France
Russia of
soutient
its
le lancement
participation
sans
in the New
délai
START
au
treaty
sein de la
and
conférence
urges
du
it to
désarmement
return
de négociation
overturn
sur
that
un
decision.
traité
France
interdisant la
supports
production
the
de matières
without delay
fissiles
launch
sur la
of
base
a
du mandat Shannon.
conference of
La
disarmament
France a rejoint le groupe
on
d'amis du
fissile
FMCT
materials
visant à
reduction
promouvoir ce
and
futur traité.
under the mandate of Shannon. France joins the group of friends of the FMCT geared to promoting this treaty, and would like to thank Japan for this initiative. And France remains committed to an entry into force of the CTBT as soon as possible, geared to the establishment of zones of
Nous réaffirmons notre attachement au traité sur l'espace extra-atmosphérique de 1967 qui prohibe le placement d'armes nucléaires ou de toute autre arme de destruction massive dans l'espace. La violation de cette norme constituerait un facteur supplémentaire de déstabilisation. Nous appelons tous les États à respecter le droit international et leurs obligations en vertu de ce traité. En deuxième lieu, nous devons répondre avec fermeté aux crises de prolifération qui menacent directement la paix et la sécurité internationale. La poursuite par la Corée du Nord de ses programmes nucléaires et balistiques viole les résolutions adoptées par ce Conseil à l'unanimité. Nous sommes préoccupés par les informations relatives aux livraisons d'armes, y compris de missiles balistiques, entre la Russie et la Corée du Nord. Nous appelons une nouvelle fois la Corée du Nord à cesser ses activités déstabilisatrices et à engager des discussions en vue d'une dénucléarisation complète, irréversible et vérifiable. L'escalade du programme nucléaire iranien s'accélère. Les derniers rapports de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique témoignent de l'accumulation d'un stock d'uranium hautement enrichi très supérieur aux limites prévues par le plan d'action global conjoint. De telles activités n'ont aucune justification civile crédible. Nous sommes par ailleurs très préoccupés face à l'absence de progrès pour régler les questions en suspens liées aux garanties. L'Iran ne peut se soustraire plus longtemps à ses obligations au titre des garanties du traité de non-prolifération. Nous demeurons résolus à ce que l'Iran ne puisse jamais développer l'arme nucléaire. Nous enjoignons l'Iran à revenir au respect de ses engagements internationaux et restons prêts à rechercher une solution diplomatique. Enfin, la France est attachée au développement sûr et responsable des usages pacifiques de l'énergie nucléaire dans le strict respect du régime de garantie de non-prolifération de l'AIEA. Nous sommes préoccupés par la situation de la centrale de Zaporijjia, illégalement occupée par la Russie depuis mars 2022. Nous réitérons notre soutien aux 7 piliers de l'AIEA et aux 5 principes énoncés par le directeur général pour garantir la sécurité de cette centrale. Nous appelons la Russie à mettre un terme à sa militarisation et à cesser d'alimenter le risque d'un accident nucléaire. Je vous remercie.
Fueling the risk of a nuclear accident. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I welcome Your Excellency to the Council to preside over this meeting, and I thank Secretary General Guterres and the other briefers for their briefings. The complete prohibition and the thorough destruction of nuclear weapons and the eventual establishment of a nuclear weapon-free world and an abiding aspiration of the international community. In today's world, the international security environment is undergoing a confluence of changes and turbulence, with the Cold War mentality rearing its ugly head, while the risk of a nuclear arms race and a nuclear conflict is rising, and the issue of nuclear proliferation remains a prominent issue. The road to nuclear disarmament remains long and arduous. Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward the Global Security Initiative, emphasizing the need to adhere to the concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. Respect the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. Attention to the legitimate security concerns of all countries. Resolution of differences and disputes among countries through dialogue, consultation, and peaceful means. And the integrated maintenance of security in both the traditional and non-traditional spheres. The GSI advocates adapting to the profoundly adjusted international scape in the spirit of solidarity and responding to complex and intertwined security challenges with a win-win mindset, with the aim of eliminating the root causes of the international conflicts, improving global security governance, and promoting the international security's joint efforts to instill more stability and certainty into our turbulent and changing times, with a view to realizing lasting peace and development in the world. It is the common aspiration and goal of the international community to build a universally secure world. The countries should join hands in practicing genuine multilateralism, adhere to a concept of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, resolutely rejecting the Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation, continuously strengthening the authority and effectiveness of the NPT Treaty, and joining efforts to promote nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. First, we should adhere to the concept of a common security and shape a stable strategic security environment. President Xi Jinping has repeatedly made it clear that nuclear weapons must never be used and a nuclear war never fought, and that the international community should jointly oppose the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. In 2022, the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states issued a joint statement on the prevention of a nuclear war, emphasizing that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. On that basis, nuclear weapon states should explore feasible measures to reduce strategic risks, negotiate and conclude a treaty on no first use of nuclear weapons against each other, and provide legally binding negative security assurances to non-nuclear weapon states. The countries concerned should reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national and collective security policies, renounce the deployment of a global missile defense system, refrain from seeking the deployment of intermediate-range missiles in the Asia-Pacific region or in Europe, and stop nuclear sharing and so-called extended deterrence, so as to maintain the global strategic balance and stability through practical actions. Countries should continue to enhance the safety, reliability, and controllability of AI technology and ensure that relevant weapon systems are under human control at all times. Second, we should adhere to a rational and pragmatic approach and promote the international nuclear disarmament in a gradual and steady manner. Nuclear weapon states should abide by the consensus on nuclear disarmament reached at the successive NPT review conferences and make a public commitment not to seek permanent possession of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are a product of history, and nuclear disarmament will naturally have a historical process, demanding that countries with vastly different nuclear policies and a number of nuclear weapons should assume the same level of nuclear disarmament and nuclear transparency obligations is not consistent with the logic of history and reality, nor is it in line with international consensus, and as such will only lead the international nuclear disarmament to a dead end. The U.S. allegations against China are totally groundless and do not hold any water. It is precisely the U.S. who should continue to fulfill their special and priority responsibility to further reduce their nuclear arsenals in a drastic and substantive manner, so as to create conditions for other nuclear weapon states to join the nuclear disarmament process and play a lead-by-example role recognized by all parties rather than self-styled. Third, we should commit to a political solution and safeguard the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. Non-proliferation hotspot issues, such as the ones on the Korean Peninsula and with Iran, have complex historical background and are closely linked to the continuity of the non-proliferation policies of a relevant country. All parties should adhere to political and diplomatic efforts to address each other's legitimate security concerns through dialogue and balanced solutions. And the United States should abandon the threat of use and the use of sanctions and pressure. The U.S. nuclear submarine cooperation with certain countries carries a high risk of nuclear proliferation. It is a serious violation of the objective and the purpose of the NPT Treaty and undermines regional peace and stability. Therefore, corrective measures should be taken to rectify it and be brought back to the right path. Nuclear weapon states should sign and ratify the protocols for the nuclear weapon-free zone treaties as soon as possible, and China reaffirms its readiness to take the lead in signing the protocol to the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty and its firm support for the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other WMDs. Fourth, we should adhere to the original intent of common development and promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Development is the cornerstone of peace and security. The international community should pay attention to the needs of developing countries for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, increase relevant financial and technical assistance, and to help implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The IAEA should play a greater role in promoting cooperation and assistance in areas of nuclear power, applications of nuclear technology, and nuclear safety and security. Relevant countries should stop generalizing the concept of national security, stop drawing lines on the basis of ideology, and stop using under the pretext of non-proliferation export control as a political tool to suppress other countries and to pursue its agenda of decoupling and breaking up the supply chain. Madam President, China has always advocated the complete prohibition of thorough destruction of nuclear weapons. 60 years ago, China solemnly declared that it would not be the first to use nuclear weapons at any time or under any circumstances. This demonstrated the most transparent policy with the most responsible attitude. It has maintained a high degree of stability and continuity and is in itself a major contribution to the international nuclear disarmament. Regardless of changes in the international landscape, China has always abided by this commitment, firmly pursued its nuclear strategy of self-defense, refrained from participating in any form of nuclear arms race, continued to maintain its nuclear force at the minimal level required for its national security, and continued to work to promote international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I too want to welcome you in the Council. I would like to thank Secretary General Guterres, Executive Secretary Dr. Floyd, and Director Ms. Mukachanova for their valuable insights today. As many of the members of the Council recall today, a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Achieving a world without nuclear weapons remains our common and ultimate goal. However, we are deeply concerned about the continuous erosion of international architecture of non-proliferation. So, Madam President, let me therefore make 3 points for today. First, there is a need to uphold and further strengthen the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. In the current complex global security environment, this is urgent. The Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons remains the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation architecture. Non-proliferation obligations under the NPT and the relevant Security Council resolutions should be consistently implemented. The safeguard system presents an indispensable role in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. We will continue to support the IAEA and its efforts of ensuring that states are honoring their international legal obligations to use nuclear material and technology for peaceful purposes only. At the same time, we deeply appreciate the CTBTO's role in detecting non-proliferation violations and upholding the global norm against nuclear testing. The efforts of the Executive Secretary of Dr. Floyd for CTBT universalization are bearing fruit, as reported by Dr. Floyd this morning. We very much welcome the continuation of these efforts, and at the same time we regret Russia's revocation of ratification of the treaty. Secondly, we need to end the deadlock of nuclear disarmament. The last two NPT review conferences have failed to demonstrate any progress in the field of nuclear disarmament, while bilateral arms reduction treaties have been slowly waning away, most recently with Russia's suspension of the New START treaty. So how to end the deadlock? An NPT-based step-by-step approach combining bilateral and multilateral elements seems to be the most feasible way forward. So for this reason, Slovenia supports the 2022 incremental steps outlined by the Stockholm Initiative for nuclear disarmament. As long as nuclear weapons exist, the risk of their use remains real. Slovenia is especially concerned with the lowering of thresholds for the use and threats of use of tactical nuclear weapons. Maintaining an option for the first use of low-yield weapons in nuclear doctrines is irresponsible and simply wrong. Thirdly, Ms. Mukachanova reminded us today of the relevance of the Security Council Resolution 984, by which the Council recognized security assurances of the nuclear weapon states against the use of nuclear weapons on non-nuclear weapon states. It also affirmed that the Council will act immediately in the event that non-nuclear states are victims of an act or object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. So we expect that the Council members are able to renew this commitment to NPT member states. And finally, Madam President, women remain understaffed in the fields of nuclear policy, disarmament, and non-proliferation. We know that women are powerful agents of change, and perhaps their full inclusion in nuclear decision-making processes can empower us all to bring about the long-awaited breakthrough in nuclear disarmament efforts towards a world without nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I'm grateful to Japan for convening this important meeting, and to the Secretary General, Dr. Floyd, and Ms. Mukachanova for their briefings. For 50 years, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has been a bulwark for global security, allowing peaceful uses of nuclear technologies to flourish while preventing the erosion of non-proliferation norms. The UK remains committed to full and complete disarmament in line with Article 6 of the NPT. We reaffirm the P5 Leader Statement of 2022 that a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. The UK is the only nuclear weapon state to have reduced to one delivery system, and we maintain a minimum credible deterrent. We have pioneered work in nuclear disarmament verification, championing transparency, and advancing risk reduction. We are one of the largest financial contributors to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization and host 13 of its monitoring facilities. This Council cannot be complacent about nuclear proliferation. We must continue to counter the DPRK's nuclear program, and we urge the DPRK to commit to denuclearization. The 1718 panel of experts carries out important work and must retain the Council's full support. We also call on Iran and Syria to cooperate fully with the IAEA and express grave concern that Iran's nuclear program has never been more advanced than it is today. It is deeply concerning that Russia, who played an important role in building the international non-proliferation and arms control architecture, has suspended its obligations under New START, de-ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and breached resolutions on Iran and DPRK to source weapons for its illegal war in Ukraine. We urge Russia to reaffirm its commitment to its international obligations. Colleagues, our non-proliferation architecture supports and enables the peaceful use of nuclear technologies worldwide. The UK is helping to expand access to peaceful nuclear technology in support of the Sustainable Development Goals through our sustained dialogue on Peaceful Uses initiative. And we've given $4.3 million in funding to the IAEA's Technical Cooperation Fund this year. Next month marks 20 years since this Council adopted Resolution 1540, helping prevent non-state actors access to WMD materials. And I take this opportunity to thank Ecuador for their stewardship. Combating nuclear non-proliferation and promoting disarmament is a global challenge. We call on all states who have not yet done so to ratify the NPT. A strong non-proliferation treaty means a more secure world. The UK is committed to a successful review conference in 2026 and looks forward to working with all UN members to this end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Et comme mes collègues, je voudrais commencer par remercier le Japon d'avoir mis cette thématique importante à l'ordre du jour de ce Conseil. Je remercie également le secrétaire général, Madame Mukatsanova et le Dr Floyd de leurs interventions et de leur engagement. Les souffrances des centaines de milliers de victimes des bombardements atomiques d'Hiroshima et Nagasaki ont été gravées dans la conscience collective de l'humanité en août 1945 et ne doivent jamais être oubliées. La prise de conscience de cette rupture traumatique est soulignée par le fait que la première résolution adoptée par l'Assemblée générale en janvier 1946 a été dédiée au désarmement nucléaire. Pendant des décennies, prévenir une nouvelle utilisation de l'arme nucléaire a été une raison d'être des Nations Unies. Notre organisation a joué un rôle décisif à cet égard en permettant le dialogue, même entre les fronts les plus durs, même dans les moments de tension extrême. Car rappelons-nous qu'au moment où le monde se trouvait au bord du gouffre, lors de la crise des missiles de Cuba, les dirigeants d'alors ont su faire un pas l'un vers l'autre afin de contenir les dangers les plus effrayants. Ce moment de tension maximale a débouché sur un début d'entente et l'élaboration de multiples instruments de maîtrise des armements nucléaires, dont le traité sur la non-prolifération des armes nucléaires, TNP. Et nous l'avons entendu aujourd'hui, une guerre nucléaire ne peut être gagnée et ne doit jamais être menée. Alors que la volatilité géopolitique fait peser un risque d'utilisation de l'arme nucléaire sans précédent depuis la fin de la guerre froide, il est de notre responsabilité de nous assurer que cette vérité, vécue par les victimes d'Hiroshima et Nagasaki, affirmée par M. Gorbatchev et Reagan en 1985 et réitérée par les membres permanents de ce Conseil en janvier 2022, ne reste pas lettre morte. Pour ce faire, nous devons tout d'abord retrouver la voie du désarmement nucléaire, comme le secrétaire général le souligne dans son nouvel agenda pour la paix. Le maintien de l'ordre international fondé sur le droit international et des règles est primordial pour notre sécurité collective. Avancer sur la voie du désarmement nucléaire est une obligation au titre du TNP. Les engagements pris dans ce traité restent valides et doivent être mis en œuvre. Nous sommes préoccupés par la dénonciation, voire la violation d'instruments essentiels de maîtrise des armements nucléaires. Les trois plus grandes puissances nucléaires n'ont toujours pas ratifié le traité d'interdiction complète des essais nucléaires. Nous les appelons ainsi que tous les autres États visés à l'annexe 2 du TICE à signer et à ratifier cet instrument sans délai. De plus, ce Conseil devrait jouer un rôle clé afin de renforcer ces normes. Il devrait s'inspirer des actions passées, par exemple, de sa résolution 984 de 1999 1995 par laquelle il a octroyé des garanties négatives de sécurité aux États non dotés. En parallèle, Madame la Présidente, nous devons réduire les risques nucléaires. Ceci n'est ni un substitut ni un prérequis du désarmement nucléaire. Mais les risques que pose la course aux armements nucléaires sont incontestables et la récente rhétorique nucléaire employée est à condamner. De plus, les nouvelles technologies, en particulier dans le domaine digital ou de l'intelligence artificielle, posent des défis inédits. La Suisse appelle les États dotés de l'arme nucléaire à mener un dialogue soutenu pour la réduction des risques nucléaires afin d'adopter des engagements concrets. Nous encourageons les États P5 et les États possesseurs de l'arme nucléaire à envisager des mesures tangibles de renforcement de la confiance, par exemple en établissant des canaux de communication de crise pour éviter les malentendus entre les détenteurs d'armes nucléaires. Nous appelons aussi tous les États possesseurs de l'arme nucléaire à faire preuve de transparence sur leur politique, doctrine et arsenal. Enfin, l'architecture mondiale de non-prolifération doit être maintenue et renforcée. Le désarmement et la non-prolifération nucléaire étant les deux faces d'une même médaille. Le TNP a fortement contribué à limiter le nombre d'États possesseurs de l'arme nucléaire, d'où l'importance de tout mettre en œuvre pour garantir sa pérennité. Les préoccupations majeures émanant du développement rapide des programmes nucléaires et balistiques en RPDC, du délitement progressif du plan d'action global commun et des nombreuses questions ouvertes suscitées par les rapports de l'Agence internationale de l'énergie atomique sur l'Iran. La Suisse rappelle que les résolutions de ce Conseil sont contraignantes et doivent être mises en œuvre par tous les États membres. Nous appelons aussi tous les États à appliquer les normes les plus élevées en matière de garantie nucléaire avec un accord de garantie généralisé complété par un protocole additionnel. Madame la Présidente, ce Conseil a la responsabilité principale du maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale. Nous devons donc fournir des réponses aux risques nucléaires actuels. Les 5 membres permanents ont une responsabilité particulière de faire avancer le désarmement nucléaire. Ils ont également le devoir de respecter et maintenir les piliers de non-proliferation. Le renouvellement du mandat du groupe d'experts sur les sanctions imposées à l'arrêt RPDC plus tard cette semaine sera un nouveau gage de cet engagement. Et en tant que présidente du comité 17-18, je vous prie, tous les membres de ce Conseil, de s'engager constructivement pour préserver cet instrument important pour le comité. Comme l'a dit le secrétaire général, je cite, la paix ne peut s'établir en l'absence de confiance et de respect mutuel. Et tous les États ont une responsabilité de contribuer à reconstruire cette confiance. Dans cette veine, le pacte pour l'avenir représente une occasion importante pour construire les leçons du passé en réaffirmant et en reprenant la voie vers un monde exempt d'armes nucléaires. Assumons cette responsabilité maintenant, dans le présent. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the Japanese presidency for convening this briefing on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. I wish to also thank Secretary General Guterres for his statement and Executive Director Floyd and Director Mukatsanova for their briefings. Madam President, the current geopolitical environment is characterized by unprecedented levels of volatility, with multiple conflicts within, between, and among states. In many instances, they involve the use of inherently indiscriminate weapons that violate multiple disarmament instruments and result in higher numbers of civilian deaths. All of this is happening against the backdrop of dangerous nuclear weapons rhetoric that seeks to normalize the threat of use of such weapons. To proceed along this path is to walk headfirst into a global catastrophe. We must, therefore, frontally address threats to the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. In doing so, there is need to enhance the role of the Security Council, strengthen the implementation of key non-proliferation instruments, ensure the responsible use of emerging technologies in nuclear disarmament, and ensure women's participation in disarmament discussions and decision-making. Firstly, the Security Council has an important role to play in risk reduction by enhancing awareness and implementation of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation instruments. As established in Article 26 of the Charter and subsequent Security Council resolutions, this Council has a duty to promote peace with the least diversion of resources for armaments and a responsibility to confront threats posed to the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture, including any non-compliance with such obligations. Divesting from armaments can play a critical role in reducing the risk of a nuclear conflict. However, it is quite evident that emphasis is placed on the maintenance, modernization, and acquisition of nuclear arsenals, while less resources are invested in development initiatives and in advancing the implementation of key non-proliferation instruments. This must change, and for the better. Notwithstanding the responsibilities of other organs of the United Nations, the Security Council must intensify its engagement and advance the regulation and reduction of armaments, including nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. In reducing the risk of nuclear conflict and strengthening the Non-Proliferation Treaty and associated regime, focus must also be placed on advancing implementation efforts of the NPT and other key instruments, including the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has made considerable progress, but more must be done. Madam President, Guyana acknowledges that new and emerging technologies pose challenges to the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regimes. In this regard, we advocate for these technologies to be regulated and used responsibly for the greater good. At the same time, we also advocate for their enhanced use in verification and monitoring to advance the global disarmament and non-proliferation agenda. Finally, on the role of women, there is no doubt that women can contribute to achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. I wish to recall that Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security stresses the importance of women's equal participation in the maintenance and promotion of peace and security and the need to increase their role in decision-making. As a signatory of the Women, Peace and Security Shared Commitments, Guyana endorses the call for the UN to lead by example in ensuring the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace processes. We strongly believe that women must be part of disarmament discussions at all levels, as they are disproportionately affected in conflicts and still underrepresented in decision-making. Madam President, colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate Guyana's commitment to the advancement of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation agenda, and to reaffirm that the only means of preventing the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is through their total elimination. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President, and I also thank the Secretary General and the briefers for their insightful briefings. We thank Japan for holding this timely meeting. In the context of increased geopolitical tensions, the Security Council has an obligation to promote and strengthen nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, with the goal of achieving a nuclear-free world. Malta has a long-standing and unwavering commitment to complete nuclear disarmament. The use of nuclear weapons can never be justifiable or acceptable. We can no longer allow the so-called deterrence doctrine. It is a paradoxical misconception and a threat to our existence. As the Secretary General noted in his new agenda for peace, the disarmament architecture is eroding. The non-proliferation regime is being violated. The two are inextricably linked and must be advanced in an organic way. Risk reduction can never be a substitute for disarmament. Ultimately, the best way to ensure non-proliferation is the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Civil society and women's peace movements also play a crucial role in this field. We welcome all efforts to promote the full, active and meaningful participation of women at all levels in all disarmament and non-proliferation fora. President, despite the failure of the last two review conferences to adopt an outcome document, the NPT remains the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. As a state party to the treaty, we are fully committed to its objectives, and we reaffirm the need to achieve its universalization. We hope that the next review conference will bring substantive results. The non-proliferation and disarmament regime is based on the balanced implementation of the three pillars of the treaty. In this connection, we call on the nuclear weapon states to fully implement Article 6. Current tensions cannot be an excuse for the delay. Rather, they should be a reason to accelerate implementation. Malta has also signed and ratified the TPNW, a landmark agreement that fills a legal gap as the first outright prohibition of nuclear weapons. The treaty is fully compatible with and complementary to the NPT. It strengthens the IAEA safeguard systems. It also recognizes the gendered impact of nuclear weapons, including with regards to victims' assistance. We will continue to advocate for its universalization with the goal of creating momentum to revive international disarmament talks. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is another fundamental pillar of the non-proliferation regime and is widely recognized as one of the most successful international instruments. We reaffirm our full commitment to the treaty, and we commend the work of the Executive Director, Floyd, towards its universalization. We deeply regret the withdrawal of the treaty by one of the Annex II states and continue to urge all states to ratify it without further delay. President, the non-proliferation regime has been severely undermined by the DPRK. Pyongyang has continuously advanced its unlawful WMD program, including through the relentless testing of ballistic missiles. Such actions are in violation of multiple Council resolutions as well as sanctions regimes. They contribute to the erosion of the non-proliferation regime. As we have said before, the threat posed by DPRK's WMD program goes beyond the Korean Peninsula. Persistent silence and failure to act by this Council will embolden potential proliferators around the world. This Council has proven its ability to come together on non-proliferation when it unanimously adopted Resolution 1540 20 years ago. We must continue to build upon these efforts. To this end, Malta will continue to support all efforts by the Security Council and other bodies. We also look forward to the next preparatory conference of the 2026 NPT Review Conference. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm grateful to Japan for organizing this timely meeting. I would like to highlight the effort of Japan towards the realization of the objective of disarmament and non-proliferation. I would like to express my gratitude to the Secretary General for his statement. I thank Mr. Robert Floyd for his briefing, and I listen also carefully to Mrs. Mukhadzinova. As we meet today, we are deeply concerned about the heightened international tensions and the looming threat of nuclear war. Nuclear disarmament is not merely a legal obligation, but a moral imperative, since nuclear weapons continue to represent the most serious threat to humankind and to the survival of humanity. The catastrophic humanitarian consequences of these weapons are a reminder of their devastating effect. We are alarmed by the lack of progress in fulfilling nuclear disarmament commitments, despite the effort of most member states. In this context, I would like to highlight the following key points. First, as a constant advocate of the NPT, Algeria urges nuclear weapon states to honor their obligation under Article 6 and to take tangible steps toward nuclear disarmament. We also call upon to non-NPT parties to join the treaties as non-nuclear weapon parties without delay and without conditions. The inability to reach consensus on the two previous NPT review conferences is a major concern for Algeria. We implore all state parties, particularly nuclear weapon states, to engage constructively to uphold the NPT regime integrity. Second, Algeria welcomes the entry into force of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the adoption of the Vienna Declaration and Vienna Action Plan. Third, we stress the critical importance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty coming into force and urge the remaining Annex II countries to sign and ratify it. 4. Nuclear weapons-free zones are essential building blocks toward a world without nuclear weapons. As one of the first African states to ratify the Pelindaba Treaty, Algeria is steadfast in its commitment in its implementation. We also emphasize the imperative of establishing a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and commend the successful convening of the UN conference dedicated to this objective. The condemnation voiced by the participating members of the conference, denouncing Israel's nuclear threats, particularly threatening to use nuclear weapons on civilians in Gaza, must be translated into meaningful action. In closing, Algeria calls for a legally binding instrument on negative security assurances for all non-nuclear weapon states and for the negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material, including the stocks. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Thank you, Madam President.
Благодарим генерального секретаря ООН Антонио Гутерреша и исполнительного секретаря Организации договора о всеобъемлющем запрещении ядерных испытаний Роберта Флойда за их доклады. Внимательно выслушали также директора программы Венского центра по разоружению и распространению Гаухар Мухаджанову. Сегодняшнее заседание – хорошая возможность вспомнить о том, какие катастрофические последствия может иметь применение ядерного оружия. Понимаем чрезвычайную чувствительность этой темы для Японии, государства, которое стало жертвой применения США ядерного оружия. В результате атомной бомбардировки американскими ВВС в августе 1945 года были уничтожены японские города Хиросима и Нагасаки. Это единственный случай в истории человечества, когда ядерное оружие было использовано не для испытания, а в военно-политических целях, причем против мирного населения. Сожалеем, что сами японские представители, раскручивая пропагандистские фейки про некую угрожающую ядерную риторику со стороны России, не находят в себе мужества прямо назвать страну, ответственную за гибель тысяч своих мирных граждан, Соединенные Штаты Америки. Именно поэтому принципиально важно сохранение исторической памяти об ужасающих последствиях этого безрассудного шага Вашингтона, сколько бы лет с тех пор не прошло. Вашингтона, который так и не покаялся за него, насколько мы можем судить, и никаких выводов не сделал. А тот факт, что никто из тех членов Совета Безопасности, кто упомянул сегодня про Хиросиму и Нагасаки, также постеснялся сказать про ответственность за это Вашингтона, лишь распаляет наших американских коллег и усиливает у них иллюзию о собственной непогрешимости и безнаказанности. Коллеги, подумайте сами, на какую роль в решении ключевых международных проблем вы можете претендовать с подобной страусиной позицией, если даже в историческом контексте боитесь назвать очевидные и бесспорные вещи своими именами? Особую важность это приобретает в нынешней удручающей ситуации в области международной безопасности и стратегической стабильности. Она стала результатом последовательной, многолетней политики США и их союзников, нацеленной на подрыв международной архитектуры, контроля над вооружениями, разоружения и нераспространения. Добиваясь максимальной свободы рук, Вашингтон либо последовательно выходил из основополагающих договоренностей в этой сфере, таких как договор об ограничении систем противоракетной обороны, договор о ликвидации ракет средней и меньшей дальности, договор по открытому небу, либо делал выполнение профильных договоренностей невозможным, как это было в случае с договором об обычных вооруженных силах в Европе и двусторонним договором о мерах по дальнейшему сокращению и ограничению стратегических наступательных вооружений. К настоящему моменту Запад окончательно сбросил маски и не скрывает своих устремлений по нанесению нашей стране стратегического поражения. Оголтелая русофобская линия США и их союзников создает риски эскалации, грозящие обернуться прямой военной конфронтацией ядерных держав. Мы сегодня услышали от западных коллег целый ряд абсурдных инсинуаций и обвинений, в том числе в контексте украинского сюжета, которые никакого отношения к реальности не имеют. Руководство нашей страны неоднократно подчеркивало их полную несостоятельность. Условия использования ядерного оружия четко прописаны в нашей ядерной доктрине, и мы ее неукоснительно придерживаемся. Сожалеем, что ни слова осуждения не прозвучало сегодня в адрес тех, кто действительно разжигает ядерную риторику. Например, министра обороны США Ллойда Остина, заявлявшего об использовании, цитирую, полного набора военных военных средств, включая ядерного оружия. Конец цитаты. В рамках расширенного сдерживания на Корейском полуострове. Или премьер-министр Израиля Биньямина Нетаньяху, грозившего, что, как цитирую, Иран должен столкнуться с реальной ядерной угрозой. Конец цитаты. Помним также, с какой легкостью были готовы нажать на ядерную кнопку в Лондоне. Видим и нарастание безответственной риторики в Париже, рискующей вергнуть мир в пучину ядерной войны. К сожалению, подавляющее большинство инициатив наших западных коллег, упакованных в красивую обертку, на поверку оказываются пустышками. И в лучшем случае являются не более чем самопиаром с их стороны. Так, упомянутый США проект резолюции Совета Безопасности о неразмещении ядерного оружия в космосе, представленный в конце прошлой недели, по нашей предварительной оценке, носит весьма политизированный и оторванный от реальности характер. И в этом нет ничего удивительного, ведь содержащиеся в нем формулировки никак не прорабатывались на экспертном уровне и не обсуждались на профильных международных площадках, включая конференцию по разоружению и комитет ООН по космосу. Из этого складывается устойчивое впечатление, что это не более чем очередной пропагандистский ход Вашингтона. Госпожа председатель, конечно, мы все хотели бы в один день проснуться в мире, в котором нет конфликтов и отсутствуют стратегические риски. Неизменно разделяем благородную цель построения мира, свободного от ядерного оружия. Но пока она видится весьма отдаленной перспективой. Обладание ядерным оружием на данном этапе является важным фактором поддержания стратегического баланса. Необходимо понимать, что разрушение этого баланса погрузит мир в хаос бесконечных войн и попыток силы установить гегемонию. Реальный прогресс на пути ядерного разоружения можно обеспечить только на основе выверенных поэтапных мер, не противоречащих принципу нанесения ущерба чьей-либо безопасности, и усилиям по поддержанию стратегического баланса. Необходимо придерживаться комплексного подхода и действовать в соответствии с буквой и духом статьи 6 ГНЯО, не пытаясь вычленить отдельные элементы из целостного контекста всеобщего полного разоружения. При этом ответственность за оздоровление международной обстановки и, как следствие, реализацию разоруженческих положений договора несут как ядерные, так и неядерные государства. Короткого пути к ядерному нулю не существует. Этой цели не добиться ни сиюминутным объявлением ядерного оружия вне закона, ни попытками установить сроки избавления от него. Как можно спрогнозировать, когда человечество будет готово навсегда отказаться от военных методов разрешения противоречий? Ответа на этот вопрос никто не знает. Поэтому идея немедленного безусловного отказа от ядерных вооружений, заложенная в договор о запрещении ядерного оружия, контрпродуктивна, ошибочна и в нынешних условиях, по сути, является ничем иным, как популизмом. Такой подход, не учитывающий реалии стратегической стабильности и интересы безопасности ядерных стран, ведет к нарастанию противоречий между государствами и подрывает авторитет ГНЯО. Важно учитывать и то, что для обсуждения вопросов ядерного разоружения и нераспространения существует профильная экспертная площадка, обзорный процесс ГНЯО, Первый комитет Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН, конференция по разоружению, комиссия ООН по разоружению. Не видим убедительных оснований для обсуждения темы ядерного разоружения еще и на площадке Совета Безопасности ООН. Он рассматривает нераспространенческую тематику, привязки к конкретным страновым сюжетам, а также через свой профильный комитет 15 1540 вопросы недопущения попадания оружия массового уничтожения в руки негосударственных субъектов. Нас крайне тревожит, что на фоне слома сложившейся системы соглашений в области контроля над вооружениями, разоружения и нераспространения серьезным испытаниям на прочность подвергается режим договора о нераспространении ядерного оружия, одного из основополагающих элементов международной безопасности. Более чем полувековая история ДНЯО подтверждает его востребованность для всех государств-участников, как обладающих ядерным оружием, так и тех, кто им не обладает. Не стоит забывать, что уникальным свойством ДНЯО, позволившим в свое время выйти на его подписание и обеспечить его почти универсальный характер, стал заложенный в его основу четко выверенный баланс трех фундаментальных составляющих: ядерного нераспространения, ядерного разоружения и мирного использования атомной энергии. Как показали итоги 10-й обзорной конференции ДНЯО, прошедшей в 2022 году, а также первой сессии подготовительного комитета обзорной конференции договора, запланированной на 2026 год, расхождения по вопросам ядерного разоружения продолжают усугубляться. А некоторые западные государства еще и подливают масло в огонь, политизируя дискуссии для продвижения своей конъюнктурной повестки. Хочу напомнить, что именно так был похоронен проект итогового документа обзорной конференции 2022 года, когда в него целенаправленно вносились провокационные и заведомо неприемлемые антироссийские пассажи, не имеющие ничего общего с задачей нераспространения ядерного оружия. Госпожа председатель, Российская Федерация твердо привержена постулату о том, что в ядерной войне не может быть победителя, и она не должна быть развязана. Именно поэтому необходимо предотвращать вооруженные конфликты между государствами, обладающими ядерным оружием. В этом смысле рассчитываем, что западные коллеги откажутся от своего крайнего опасного и деструктивного курса. Мы открыты в рамках нового обзорного процесса ДНЯО конструктивному диалогу со всеми странами, заинтересованными в выходе на консенсусное понимание о путях создания предпосылок для дальнейшего ядерного разоружения на основе укрепления международной безопасности и учета интересов всех сторон. Госпожа председатель, что касается вопросов стратегического диалога между Россией и США с прицелом на новые договоренности по контролю над ракетно-ядерными вооружениями, то они не могут быть обособлены от общего военно-политического контекста. Основа для такой работы в условиях попыток западных стран нанести России стратегическое поражение и их отказа уважать наши жизненно важные интересы мы не видим. Любое взаимодействие в этой сфере будет возможно только в случае кардинального пересмотра США и НАТО, их крайне враждебного антироссийского курса и их готовности вступить в комплексный диалог с учетом всех значимых факторов стратегической стабильности с акцентом на устранение первопричин наших фундаментальных противоречий в области безопасности. Мы будем ориентироваться не на красивые слова и пустые призывы, а на дела, которые пока убедительно указывают на незаинтересованность США и их союзников к сколько-нибудь серьезному разговору, в котором, как мы сегодня могли убедиться, заинтересован как раз весь мир. Истерики и угрозы из Вашингтона, Лондона и Брюсселя нас нисколько не впечатляют и общей картины не меняют. Чем раньше наши оппоненты это осознают и перестанут валить с больной головы на здоровую, тем больше шансов на то, что упомянутые генеральным секретарем ООН часы судного дня хотя бы замедлят свой ход, а в идеале начнут обратный отсчет. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.